Well, hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to the Saturday morning episode of Money Mixology. As always, I am your host, Jason. Normally, on our Saturday morning shows, this is where we have our guests on live in the studio. But as was inevitable at some point in the show, we have a guest who had a family emergency and was unable to make it this morning. However, I kind of assumed this was going to happen at some point in our journey on the show. So I have been saving up the questions that have come in through the email and directly through the different social media channels over the course of the last couple of months. And I figured today would be a good chance to just go ahead and answer some of those questions. Now, there's a few of them that are pretty obvious which show they came from just based on the content of the question. I think you'll recognize those. But I'm going to actually start off today's show with one that, frankly, I'm not even remotely surprised I'm being called out on. And I couldn't tell you which specific show this question came from because this topic has come up on pretty much every one of the live radio shows we've done so far. So I'll start off with this one. You have mentioned the quote unquote debt crusader a number of times. Why don't you like him? All right. As I said, I'm not at all surprised that this one has come out. He's obviously very popular. So let's go ahead and just dive in and name this. This is obviously the Dave Ramsey show that we're talking about here. Hopefully, since his show is just slightly larger in audience than mine, I'm hoping I don't get sued into the ground for this. But before I discuss my challenges with the Ramsey situation or the Ramsey model, I do want to throw a couple of caveats out there, a couple of asterisks. Number one, I actually don't disagree with everything that the Ramsey model stands for, and I'll make that clear here in a moment. There are certainly pieces of his style of planning, his advice he gives that I agree with, that I think are positive movements in the right direction for most people. So I do want to make that really clear. There are parts I disagree with, and I'll get to those in just a moment. But I did want to say that I don't disagree with everything that him and his team believe in or preach about. There are things I support. The second part that I would like to throw out there is that I want to acknowledge and recognize that in the last couple of years, as Dave himself has stepped back from the forefront and is not on as many of the episodes or the shows, isn't as involved in the actual advice giving, he's turned it over to people like George, who kind of hosts the show most of the time now. As that has happened, I will say the advice has become more moderated, and I think that's for the good. I think that has made a positive impact on the advice that they're providing. I think it gives a different flavor and a different tenor to the program. I will say candidly, I think the show has gotten stronger. I don't want to say better because I think the listeners liked it all along, if that was sort of your cup of tea. But I think that the advice that's given has taken a more proactive and a more positive bend, which I think is positive for the listeners and for the people trying to get that advice. All that said, let me dive in specifically to the issues that I do have with the Ramsey model, if that's what you want to call it. It's essentially based on his philosophy of the Financial Peace University, or the book, I should say, that he had published. That's where most of this stuff comes from, and it is sort of his foundational piece, and it's typically what I'm referring to when I talk about the debt crusader style of financial advice. So my first major problem I have with the entire situation is that this gentleman is not a financial planner, never has been, doesn't have any formal training, has no background. This is by his own admission. So please don't take this as a personal attack or an ad hominem attack on Ramsey himself, but by his own admission, he is a failed real estate investor. And so I don't criticize that piece. I have a failed business in my past. I'm not trying to criticize anybody for making mistakes. That's how we learn and grow and get better in the future. My challenge is that we have, as a nation, started to treat him like the expert, but he isn't. And so if you contrast him with someone who I also don't find their personality to be one of my favorites, but somebody like Susie Orman, I think is a far, far stronger financial planner, financial advice giver. She actually has a background in financial planning, has been doing it for decades, and is just far more versed in the entire sphere of products that are out there, the intricacies, the context of different clients. She's worked directly with clients. So I think that someone like that is better positioned to give advice. So this isn't a personal attack on Ramsey. This is just a professional sort of critique on the situation. More pertinent to the debt situation, I want to be clear with the listeners out there that I 100% support the concept that Ramsey pushes, which is that you should not be taking on irresponsible debt. I am 100% on board with that. You should not be charging things on your credit card you can't afford. You should not be taking on homes you can't afford. You should not be purchasing cars you can't afford. I am completely in his boat and rowing in the same direction on those types of things. Where I deviate strongly from him is in two critical areas that I think make a huge difference, and it is largely based on the psychology. So the first one is this idea that no debt is good, that you should remove all debt from your life. I just adamantly disagree with that. That is just fundamentally incorrect. If you were to simply do a survey of all of the wealthy people in this country, debt is extensively used. So it is an absolutely false statement to say that the rich people or the wealthy people, whatever term you'd like to use, that they are not accessing or utilizing debt in their journey to growing that wealth. The simple fact is they are. And so I think that that is a major problem when we start trying to remove all debt altogether. For example, now, and I will say again, George has moderated this stance on mortgages. So just to be clear about that on their show. But when it comes to mortgages, if you listen to the show called My Money Guy with Brian and Bo, they have a really good perspective on it. While I agree you should be trying to get 10 or 20% to put down towards your house, ideally 20% so you can get rid of PMI, while that's true, it is very difficult mathematically to pull that off while the houses continue to accelerate in value. As they increase, they're basically running away from you. So you're trying to save the 20% while the house is getting more and more and more and more expensive. That becomes very problematic. You need to get into the game. So if that means you have to put the minimum down that you can to get, say, an FHA first-time home buyer's loan so that you can start playing the mortgage game and start getting equity in your house, I'm okay with that as a planner. Now, I do support the idea that you should, as quickly as you can, get below the 20% threshold so that the PMI goes away. But you can do that while you own the house. That way, as the house's value is going up, you're the one profiting from that, not sitting around kind of chasing the ghost, if you will. So that's one area where, again, I just think that the use of debt is in some cases necessary. Also, if you look at something like autos, and to be clear, as I've said many times on the show, I spend too much money on my car. So I acknowledge that up front. That said, there is a time and place for taking a loan on a car because it is your primary way to get to your place of employment, which is how we generate our income side. That does not give you permission to go buy cars you can't afford, to be clear, but there is a time and place for using debt as a tool to gain access to your employment. So I think that is incredibly powerful. The final one is education, and this is where Ramsey and I differ greatly. I don't want people taking on excessive amounts of student loan debt. That's never a positive. However, it still remains the fact, and Dr. Dinsmore mentioned this a few weeks ago when he was on the show, your level of education is still the best predictor of your future earning power. Simple as that. And so when you look at education as an investment in yourself and in your potential earning power, that is where the taking on some debt to make that happen does have some logic to it. Now, you should be sure your degree is employable. You should be sure that your degree has a high earning potential. Don't go get a degree in something that's useless and rack up a bunch of debt. That's all true. But in general, getting a degree, say from Wright State University, where we are here, and you go get a finance degree, you're going to come out of school making probably 2 times what you would be making if you didn't have that degree. So when you're talking about the magnitude of an extra 30 to 40,000 a year in income, that is not something you should just scoff at and say, well, there's no way I'd ever take on debt to do that. I just disagree with that fundamentally. So I think that, again, I want to be clear in my approach. I always joke about the Dave Ramsey thing. He is a massive, massive influence in this country, especially in the financial world. He has the largest radio show in this space. He's got the most followers. He's got the most impact on what we do. I just want to caution it that it doesn't contextually hold up in many cases. The final part that I want to mention is this debt snowball, which is sort of his signature. I actually agree with the debt snowball. I like that methodology of pay one down completely, get rid of it, and then roll the payment you were making on that first debt over to the second debt and so on. Carry it, let the snowball go down the hill. I agree with all of that. However, I think that psychologically you are far better off to use a hybrid approach. And what I mean by that is that instead of eating ramen noodles for a whole year and putting every single penny you have towards paying off the debt, you should take a moderated approach. Statistically speaking, at least as best we can tell in the industry, people who go on the full boat Dave Ramsey plan have less than a 20% success rate. It just doesn't hold up over time. It's not because it won't mathematically work. It absolutely will. If you can stick to the plan, it will work. It's just incredibly difficult and unreasonable for most people. If you take a hybrid approach of saying, I'm going to put a good chunk of money towards the debt, and then I'm going to put a small chunk of my money towards investments or saving, whatever term you'd like to use, by doing that, let's say you get a year down the road, you will feel so much better about where you stand emotionally, because while you will have spent a lot of time and money paying off past mistakes, paying off that debt, that's painful psychologically. You have also gained the positive side of providing for your future, of growing your savings and your investments. You'll have something good that you have done that you can look forward to. I fully acknowledge that mathematically you'd be better off to pay off the expensive debt. 100% agree with the math on that one. Just 100% disagree with the psychology. It doesn't work. So it might be mathematically the best. And we talked about this on one of the earlier episodes of math versus mental. It doesn't matter if the math makes sense if you won't stick to it. And in 80% of the cases, statistically speaking, they don't stick to it. It's just too rigid. And so if that's going to be the case, if you're going to fail anyways, then you should pick a plan that is better, that works better and has a better success rate. The hybrid debt payoff plan has a somewhere in the high 60s, around 70% success rate. So it's 50% more likely to succeed. So you should take that approach. It's just a better approach. Those are my general comments sort of on quote unquote the Ramsey thing, if you will. Again, don't hate him, have nothing against him, think he's really powerful in the industry. Just think that some of his advice should be moderated and fit into people's context a little better. I also think if you're going to reach out and try to get financial advice, you should probably do it from somebody who's an actual financial planner. That would be helpful. So that's the first one. Get off my soapbox on the debt crusader. So these next couple of questions actually come really specifically from one of the episodes. You can just sort of tell by the topic that's thrown out there. So the first one is, my husband recently bought me a large present. While I like it, we're trying to pay off debt and have very little in savings. Should I consider this financial infidelity, and how would I even tell him? Well, the good news here is that no, I don't think I would consider that to be financial infidelity, with a couple of small caveats to that question. One, I have no idea if you have made it clear to this, in this case, your husband, that you don't want the gifts, that you don't think that this is a good use of money. In many cases, and this will cross over a little bit with poverty mindset. So on next week's Talking Head episode that's coming up, we'll be talking about the poverty mindset. And in doing that, one of the areas that is important to understand is that somebody has a need to provide these gifts as a way to compensate for their internal sort of dissatisfaction with their money situation. And so often people who are in a poverty situation will buy gifts they can't afford. It doesn't make a lot of sense on the surface, but it does when you understand that they're trying to sort of overcome this internal deficit that they feel. If your husband is buying the gifts as a way of showing affection, as a way of trying to show that he can be a provider, which is one of the other money mindsets we'll be discussing, if he has the provider bias, if he's doing those things, then it's really not infidelity. He's not purposely trying to hide money. He's not trying to hide income. He's not trying to use money in a way you haven't agreed to, at least not intentionally. If you'd like to say, well, we have discussed this very clearly and he's still doing it, okay, then potentially that could be considered infidelity if he's breaking the rules of the sort of arrangement you've agreed to. But I would still consider it to be relatively minor because there's no secrecy involved here. It really is coming down to just a disagreement about the use of the money, the utility. I don't know that in your case I would go on the offensive and attack him for this, if you will. And I know attack is probably too harsh of a word, but I would not be aggressive in my approach to this. This really calls for the two of you to sit down and discuss what are the true goals. Does he even know that your goal is to pay off the debt / build up the savings account, that that's more important to you than buying new things? He may be completely unaware of that. This could have been a 100% unintentional kind of breach of trust, if you will. And I think you would want to establish that statement first and say, okay, Does this person know what our joint goals are? And in some cases, to be fair to the other spouse, you're telling me that you believe the goals are to pay off the debt and to save money, but does the other spouse even agree to that? I think that's really where the conversation needs to happen is on the front end. You both need to sit down and have an open and honest conversation about what are we actually trying to accomplish and what do I value, what do you value, so that we can get on the same page with where we're trying to go. What is this journey we're even on? Before we start accusing people of deviating from the path, did they even agree to be on this path? I will just real quickly kind of throw out there that this may require you as a couple to go to an outsider. It doesn't have to be a financial therapist. It could just be a traditional financial planner who can help you do some goal setting, simply because you may want to remove the emotional component from this. There is definitely a piece of this that is going to be a utility play. And again, the concept of utility from early in the show's episodes is the way that you personally value things. It's not the dollar figures, it's the value you place on experiences, purchases, whatever it may be. This could just be a difference between what you value and what your husband values. Often, when two people have that issue, it's hard for them to discuss it directly because they are always going to be sort of anchored into their view of it, their version. If you have an outsider, a third party help you in this particular situation, they have no vested interest in either of you being right. They're just going to ask the questions and dig in a little bit and have you sort of formulate a solid, coherent plan that both of you can buy into. Once that happens, once you have taken that step, then if you feel that your husband continues to kind of deviate from the path, at that point, then I think the term infidelity would be a little more apt to apply. And perhaps you'd have to then consider some additional steps, which may include going to a financial therapist if that was required. But in many, many, many cases that I've seen, this is not required. This is simply a misunderstanding of what path or what journey we're even trying to be on together. That would be my direct advice, is to sit down and have the conversation, not about I don't like the fact that you bought this gift, or I didn't want this gift. None of the attacking. Approach the conversation from saying, I would just like to have a discussion about what you and I want to accomplish together. What is our joint mission here? What journey are we trying to go on, so that we can both agree what's allowed and what's not allowed? And maybe it is, again, sort of this gray area hybrid where he says, I still want to be able to buy you small gifts because that's how I show you affection. And you say, okay, but I would like to be able to pay off some of this debt over time. Well, you can meet in the middle there. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. So approach it from getting on the same page, not from showing him that he's wrong. I think that will ease off the emotional side. It will take the temperature of the room down and allow both of you to have a more focused discussion around what you're trying to accomplish, as opposed to becoming personal attacks on each other, which just by definition won't get you anywhere. All right, so that's our first two questions down. I'm going to take a quick break and then we'll come back and carry on with some more listener questions. Stay with me. All right, welcome back to Money Mixology. For today, we are answering some listeners' questions that have come in from the various episodes over the last few months. So question number 3 for today clearly came from the episode when I had Lincoln and Avery here in studio with me. So the question is, your sons talked about how having you as a dad helped them learn money. I have a 4-year-old. What should I be teaching him? So I think this is an absolutely fantastic question, and I do recognize that on a good number of the episodes so far, I have talked about the things I've done with my kids and sort of how I've tried to help them and where I think it's important to take some steps. I think last week Ryan asked me about the financial literacy component within schools, and I gave my opinion on what we're doing well and what we could be doing better. So specific to the question about a 4-year-old, and this is really more broadly, I'm going to give the answer based on what I think happens at different ages as the child grows up. And that way, if you are a parent and you have a child pretty much at any age, you can kind of jump in at the stage at which I sort of mention that you should be teaching them something. So I will start off by saying that the primary thing you can teach young children, these 4, 5, 6 year olds, is the very, very strong difference between needs and wants. And I think that every parent who's ever had a young child understands that for a 4-year-old, everything is a need. They are going to claim that I need that toy or I'm going to die. I need to go to that birthday party or my world will end. I understand that they're going to need, quote unquote, everything under the sun. But the reality is it does become imperative on us to teach them the difference between true needs and what they would consider the wants. And there are various ways you can do this. You can simply have them name it. When you say you need this, do you actually need it or do you just want it? And understanding that it's okay to want something. I do think that's an important piece that gets missed in this conversation. You should be articulating to your children that wanting something is acceptable. That's okay. It's simply a matter of being able to differentiate between those two things. And so having the discussions, and this is where even discussions about things that you personally want, you can have that discussion with them because it will remove the emotion from the conversation for the child. Now, 4 years old, it's going to be tough. I acknowledge that. This may be, getting up into that 5, 6-year-old as they sort of enter kindergarten type of age group. But as you talk to them and you have decisions that you have to make in your life about something you may want or need or whatever, maybe they're with you at the store and you purposely pick out a article of clothing that you may or may not actually want very desperately, but you're going to play act to that I would really like to have this jean jacket. And you say, but little Johnny, we do have to consider whether we need it or not. And just these general conversations to get the vocabulary out there, to get the topic of money on the table so it's not taboo in the house, so that they feel comfortable asking questions, becomes really important to help the children just sort of develop a way of discussing money that is healthy and able to be continued. The next sort of stage you would take would be the allowance. And this is pretty common among parents. I don't think I'm telling you anything here that's earth shattering. But what I will throw out there is the allowance should not happen under any circumstance until the child is earning it. There should never be such a thing as my kid just gets $10 a week so that they can learn how to budget. That's not how budgeting works, because if they never earned it, there is absolutely no cognitive connection to that money. It's a gift. And that is a very, very different thing than someone earning the money in whatever way you feel is appropriate. I don't care how you as a parent choose to do that. If it's through chores, which is sort of be the traditional model, and that's perfectly acceptable and has worked for generations. If it is grades, so if you're making people earn their money through their schoolwork, which is frankly how we did it with our kids, that's fine too. I don't care how you choose to do it in terms of making them earn the money. Just make sure that there is some sort of a connection. The one caution I would give to the ability to earn that money is do not tie it to athletic performance. This is already something we struggle with in our society, thinking that athletes are in some way superior to everybody else. We should not be encouraging that as a means of your only way of success in life. In addition to that, any child who cares to put the effort in can simply go clean the counters in the kitchen and put their laundry away. The simple reality is that not every child can be the best athlete on the field. And so you are putting your child in a very unfortunate situation if you tell them the only way you get maximum amount of money is if you are the very best athlete on the field. That may be an unrealistic thing for some children, and that's going to be challenging. I also would never want a child to grow up thinking that their only value is in being the best athlete. That's not very good for their mental health and not sustainable over time. They're eventually going to run into athletes that are just simply better than they are, no matter how good they are. Be cautious with that. Once they've established that, then I would consider allowing them to do some budgeting. However, what I would suggest you start with, and this could be somebody that's 10, 11, somewhere in that area, have them do the budget for a specific event or a specific project. So for example, let's say their birthday party, where you sit down and say, listen, Johnny, we're going to spend $100 on your birthday party. And I would like your input on how we choose to spend that $100 so that it's very contained. It is a very sort of unilateral project that they can't veer off. If you think about the budget that we as adults build, you have the option of getting less of a car so that you can go out to eat more, those kinds of things. You don't want to give the child those options in phase one. You want to say the only choices are associated with this specific birthday party. So do you want more cake? Do you want less ice cream? Do you want more decorations? What do we want to do here within this very, very confined space so that they don't get overwhelmed with too many choices and veer off into other areas that really have no applicability to it? Because it'd be too easy for them to say, well, I'd rather just have a lot more toys. Well, yeah, that's easy for you to say because you're not paying for it. So keep it constrained to one specific area. It will work better for them to get the idea of what they're trying to do. Once they reach middle school, you should be getting them a debit card. And there's a lot of parent-controlled ones. A brand that's out there, I'm not saying I recommend this, just throwing it out there, something called Greenlight. It's a debit card for children that's controlled by the parents, essentially. But all of your major banks now have these types of programs where you can get a child's debit card. So you have some controls on it. You can limit what vendors it can be spent at. There's some parental controls that are built in, which I think are positive. Once they have that, all birthday money, all grade card reward money, if they are getting that allowance, all of that goes directly to the debit card. It's not handed to the child. You will find the magical ability of that child to suddenly spend less when it's their money. I know this is shocking, and I say that tongue in cheek. It's not shocking to anybody. If I go to the store and I say, hey, you did a great job on your report card, here's $50, they'll just say, okay, let's spend $50. If instead I say, I put $50 onto your debit card because you did really well on your report card, that child will magically and suddenly be less excited about spending all $50. They might go get, a $10 toy or something like that. But because it's now their money, they'll magically spend less of it. And they will just naturally begin that process of understanding that I want to keep some of this for future desires or whatever. So get them the debit card in that middle school area. Once they hit teenage status, you should get them involved in the stock market. There's lots of apps out there that will let you buy small pieces of stocks. It's called fractional shares. What you're trying to do here is, yes, teach them about the stock market a little bit, but it's more about breaking imposter syndrome. It is about showing the young person that you are an investor. You can be an investor. That alone will give them a massive leg up when they reach adulthood. They will walk in their first day of their adult job, and when they're offered that 401k, they will immediately know, yes, I can do this. I've done it in the past. This is what I do. And so they may not even know it very well. They may not intellectually or knowledge-wise know it really, really well, but they will know for sure that they are an investor. That alone is what you're trying to instill in them. Two other real quick cautions on this child thing. Make them pay for their car insurance. And I will repeat myself, make your child pay for their car insurance. They have to begin to understand, one, how expensive it is, and two, that stuff in the world isn't free. Even the basic necessities of just our everyday living are expensive. And they have to begin to understand that just going out and driving your car around, the gas and the insurance that you use, because it's, as a parent, I'm not out driving it around. It's not me doing it. You're choosing to do this. So therefore, you're choosing to take on the expense. Please, parents, start making your kids pay for some stuff. The final piece, this is critically important, so please hear me on this. I'm going to do an entire episode on conversations you should have with your kids. There will be a full talking head video coming in the near future about, or even maybe a series about how to train up kids on money. But one of the critical things I'm going to cover is financial enmeshment. This is the concept of parents overly involving their children in their family finances. In some cases, parents begin to treat their children like their confidant, like their therapist, like their friend. They are none of those things. They are your child. They should have nothing to do with your family finances. They should not be involved in the decision about what car you buy. They should not be involved in the decision about what to do with the money. They should not have influence over your budget. You can, by certainly at different stages, begin to introduce those things to them. If you're, say, for example, going to go buy a new car and they are a young teenager, it would absolutely be appropriate to sit them down and discuss with them the process you are going through. Hey, Johnny, I just want to explain to you, we're getting ready to get a new car. Here's what I'm looking at. Here's how I decided on what type I was trying to get. Here's how we decided on the budget. All of those kind of things as you talk them through the process, but they are not involved in the process. The reason for that is you are putting stress on a child for something they cannot influence or control. This is especially pronounced when you start to complain to a child about the financial difficulties the house is having. Johnny, I'd like to get you that toy, but we barely were able to pay utility bills this month. You just put a stress on that child who is now worried about the fact that their electricity and heat might get turned off, that something in their house isn't stable. You have shaken the ground floor of their house in a way that they have no power to fix. That is unfair to your child. So stop oversharing, stop complaining to them, stop telling them things that are putting stress in their world in a way that they have no ability to cope with or solve. That is unfair to them. It's called enmeshment, and it's very, very dangerous, and it causes a toxic relationship with the parents. Again, I'll have a future video series coming where we'll go into real details at each step. I'll talk about some of the products you can use, those kind of things. But in general, that's where we're going. The next question that we're going to cover is, I automated my bills and now I'm worried I'm missing something. Can you be too automated? So this obviously comes from one of the very first episodes on automation. And what this person that asked the question is referring to is what we call cognitive offloading. So in psychology, it's understood that your brain has a limited amount of temporary space. Your short-term memory is kind of a finite bucket. This is why, just very simply, if you decide you're going to go to the grocery store, you write down a list instead of trying to memorize everything, because that's next to impossible. It's the same concept. Automation works so well because it removes a lot of the load off of our brain. Right? That's the whole point, that decision fatigue we talked about. You want to remove that. But in doing cognitive offloading, which is, again, removing a lot of the resource requirements of your brain, getting your memory off the table. In doing that, there is a fear that I will sort of just set it and forget it. And Ryan mentioned this last week, that he doesn't love that term because people have a tendency to do that. They set something in place and they just totally forget about it because it's not top of mind by literal definition. Do I think you can be too automated? No, but I do believe you can be too inattentive to your finances. Just because you have automated your 401k and your bill paying and any amount of money going to your savings and whatever else is going on in your world does not excuse you from keeping an eye on it, from logging in and at least checking to make sure things are in place, making sure that nothing's gone haywire. As I mentioned on that episode, I have every possible thing I can come up with automated in my financial life. Yet I go in every Friday and I still check everything. I balance the account. I just do a quick double check. I take a glance at some of the accounts and try to make sure we're at least still on the right path. So the question that was specifically asked, can you be too automated? The answer is no, I don't think so. But you can unfortunately lose track of it if you're not doing a good job of monitoring it. So it doesn't excuse you from the monitoring or exempt you from the monitoring process. Still, please, I reiterate, do everything you can to automate because it will make your life a heck of a lot easier. In some cases, you want to cognitively offload. Get that stuff off the top of your brain so you're not wearing yourself out with these decisions all the time. All right, so we're going to take our last break and then we'll come back and finish up. So stay with me. All right. Welcome back to our final segment for today. Again, for today's show, we are answering some listener questions from the email. I guess I should throw it back out there that if you aren't aware, it's info@moneymixology.com. I would kindly ask that if you have questions, you send it directly to the email. I know that through Spotify and iTunes and YouTube, there's a way to submit comments. Those are really hard for me to get to. So if you could do me a favor and just submit it to the email, that would be a heck of a lot faster. It comes through a little cleaner for me. I can respond to you directly a lot faster. If you have a specific question that for your specific situation you want me to answer, I'm happy to do so, but it's much, much easier if it comes to me through email. So please, again, info@moneymixology.com. So the next question for today is, any advice on life insurance for a young couple with a kid? I'm not actually sure what episode this came from because we haven't discussed life insurance too tremendously much on the show. We kind of mentioned it here and there, but and this is what I would consider to be more of a CFP direct question as opposed to the financial psychology side. But again, I'm happy to answer it. It is important. So when it comes to life insurance for a young couple with a kid, first thing I'll throw out there is that you have the two factors that matter for life insurance. So I want to be clear with a statement here. Not everybody needs life insurance. I understand that you have been told by the industry, probably a young salesman, that you are required to have life insurance from the day you are born till the day you die, that every single second of your life you should have life insurance. That is simply a false statement. There is no basis for that. Life insurance in its purest sense is designed to replace income. That is what life insurance is for. And it also is designed to protect the ones you leave behind. So if you are not married and you do not have children, there is no one left to protect in a pure sense, assuming you're not taking care of someone else. If you don't have those, then who are you protecting? If you're single with no kids and you pass away, who needs your income? No one left. Your debts die with you, so that won't be a problem. I would throw that out there that if you've gotten a call from some sort of a debt collector or something, let's say your parent dies and they say, hey, your mom owed us money and now it's, because you're the child, it's your debt. Nope, no, it isn't. That is not how it works at all. You can tell them to buzz off. So assuming you didn't sign for that debt as a cosigner or something, but assuming that's not the case, you can just tell them to go away. Now, all of that said, this particular person is asking that they are married and do have a kid. So they have the two factors that, there's two individuals that if they pass away, they're going to need to take care of. I think that this is one area, kind of going back to the very first question from today, I'm in full support of Dave Ramsey. You should only buy term insurance. Now, whole life insurance or permanent insurance, as it's officially known, does actually have a time and place. It's a product that can be used for very specific situations. It can be very powerful when it's used correctly. It's more importantly or more commonly used as an estate planning tool. So I'm not against whole life insurance, but for the type of question this person's talking about, which is this person dies and their spouse and child are left behind, that's term insurance all day, every day, for a few reasons. Number one, it's pure insurance. You're not trying to mix it with other products, not trying to build in savings. You're not trying to do any of this other nonsense that whole life does. You are simply buying insurance as protection, which I like. I like keeping my products separate. Secondly, it's simply affordable. Incomes in this country have risen sharply in the last few decades, and because of that, if we're trying to replace the income, we need a pretty decent amount of life insurance. And if you use a general rule, which is 10 times income, now I want to be clear, that's not actually how you should buy life insurance. You should do a needs assessment. You should have an actual life insurance agent or a financial planner do a needs assessment to determine the real amount of money you need to have. But for the sake of today's show, just as a real quick nitty gritty, let's just use the 10 times rule. If that's the case and you're even making $50,000 a year, that's a $500,000 policy for a young couple. If you were to try to buy that through whole life, it would be brutally and unobtainably expensive. That would be just outside of the realm of what you could afford to do, and you shouldn't do it. It's unnecessary. So go with the term because you can get a lot more for your money, and the protection you're trying to buy is much easier to obtain through that model. So again, use term insurance for this type of situation. Second piece I would throw in here is that don't forget the spouse, even if they are not working. If they are working, then obviously there's the same kind of mathematical gymnastics we have to do. But if they are not working, that does not absolve you of the need to get them life insurance because there is a potential that their death could cause a decrease in your income. So even if you're the sole breadwinner, I'm going to use myself as an example, although full disclosure, my wife does work. So this is a very sort of odd example, but just go with me here. During a lot of our children's upbringing, I was working two jobs. I was working my full-time position, and then I was adjuncting here at the university, which obviously I continue to do. A piece of that we were able to do because my wife was there. She was the one who was taking the kids to soccer practice and getting them to their band concerts and all the things that are necessary at night for all these extra activities, cooking them dinner and taking care of them, and in many cases, bathing them and getting them in bed before I even got back from teaching. None of that could happen if she wasn't there, which means I would not have been able to teach. So even though I was the breadwinner, it wouldn't change the fact that we would have a drastic loss in income if something was to happen to my wife. So I still had to have life insurance on her to cover that portion of it. So we need to get away from this idea that being a homemaker is not a job. It absolutely is. And in many cases, probably the harder job. We should be taking that into account. The final part on this is that when it comes to the child does not need life insurance. Gerber baby plans are unnecessary at best, nonsensical at worst. What they are designed to do, and this is where I will at least give a little bit, they are designed to ensure insurability. And so if a child has a Gerber baby plan, which is sort of the common term we use for it, is like saying Kleenex. If they have a life insurance plan on a baby or a child, if the child was to develop some sort of terminal disease or some sort of disability or something that would make life insurance unobtainable when they became an adult, they're still able to obtain it because the Gerber babies have guaranteed insurability on them. You can convert it to the adult plan once they reach 18. So that part of it is, I'll say, somewhat positive. However, if you think about it, if your child was to develop some sort of a terminal disease, the odds that they would ever reach the point of needing regular life insurance for a spouse or a kid just diminish greatly. And I'm not in any way trying to be cruel or make anybody feel negative about this or depressed about this, but it's just the reality of the way the math works. And so just keep that in mind, that it's just unnecessary in most cases. They'll also sometimes refer to it as funeral insurance. That's, first of all, morbid. And second of all, just again, unnecessary. There's no reason to have a monthly expense for years and years to cover a procedure or an event that's going to cost you a few $1,000s. So I don't love that plan. I never used it for my kids. I don't recommend it to clients. So just be mindful of what it really is if you decide to go down that path. It's most cases unnecessary. All right. The final question, and this will be short because we are going to do an entire episode on this coming up here shortly probably on the radio show actually, which is the origin story behind money mixology. The question was, how did you even get into this nonsense? That was their wording, which I thought was funny, and I don't disagree with it. This is a world of nonsense. Really, really quickly, in a couple of minutes we have here, again, we're going to have a whole episode on this. Two things specifically happened that kind of steered me into the world of financial psychology. So the first was a story that I tell in my book about some of my students here at the university, and I could never quite put my finger on when I would teach financial literacy to these young people, again, 18 to 20-year-olds, somewhere in that area. Some of them would go on and have amazing starts to their financial picture. They would have really strong credit scores. They would come out with a savings plan already established. They would be automating their bills right out of the gates. I was getting emails from students that were only out of school 2 or 3 years. They were buying their first house. They had paid off their car. They were doing these incredible things. I was so proud of them. But yet, I obviously had a percentage of the students who were not doing that. And I struggled internally to figure out all of these people are getting the same information. They are all taking the same course. They're with me in the same classroom. They're hearing the same information. This is not a knowledge problem. What is happening here? What am I missing? And so that was a piece of it that I started to explore, kind of where did this come from? Where's the disconnect? And it really is the psychology piece that, again, it's not knowledge. I mean, the whole crux of my show is that this isn't about knowledge. It's about behavior. This is, you grow your wealth through behavior, not through knowledge. That's where the first stage of me turning down this path of behavior and psychology-based finance. The second piece, and I am not saying something my wife has not heard 1,000 times at this point, but it is my wife. My wife was raised in a religion that was very, very, very restrictive in terms of no birthdays, no Christmases, no holidays, no joy, no fun. Because of that, every year at Christmas when we got married, she was way, way over the top with Christmas from my perspective. And I always found it kind of comical how excited and obsessed she was with Christmas. And it dawned on me after a while that this is because of something that's going on in the background, that this is not a money thing for her at all. It had no bearing on finances whatsoever. It played out that our finances had to come into play, obviously, but it was entirely based on her family history, her background, her upbringing, that was changing the way she viewed money. And once I knew her sister, my sister-in-law, who I love dearly, once I knew her, I saw the same impact being done on her, that she was really, really obsessed with birthdays and Christmas and things like that, far more than you would think someone would normally be. And it was entirely based on a history. So as that started to happen, I started to get more and more involved in this and to understand I need to learn more about this process. So that's where the show came from. And again, I'll be doing a whole show on the origin story and talking through sort of how you get here and ways to think about it and stuff like that. So that'll be coming in the future. I do want to thank everybody today. Please keep the questions coming. These are incredibly helpful for me as the host. We'll be back again next week, hopefully with a guest this time. Until then, everybody enjoy your week and have a wonderful time. I appreciate it. Have a good day.